Here is something that will bother you for the rest of the day. The single most powerful plant growth booster available to American farmers costs $3 at Walmart, fits in your shirt pocket, and has been sitting in your bathroom cabinet for the last 100 years. And the billion-dollar fertilizer industry has been quietly hoping you never figure out what it actually does. Stay with me, because in the next 14 minutes, I am going to show you a 5-minute recipe that takes one common household ingredient and turns it into the fastest visible plant transformation you have ever applied to a garden. We are talking leaves going from pale yellow to deep, vibrant green within a single week. Across tomatoes, peppers, cucumbers, roses, fruit trees, and even your houseplants. But before I give you the recipe, I need to show you the science behind why this works. Because if you understand the why, you will never look at a struggling plant the same way again, and you will immediately recognize a problem in your garden that has probably been costing you yield for years without you ever knowing it. If this kind of real practical farming knowledge is what you are here for, hit that subscribe button right now. I drop content every week that the garden centers and the fertilizer companies do not want you to know. And drop a comment below telling me what you are growing this season. I read every single one. Now, let me tell you a story that starts in England in 1618 and ends in your garden this weekend. A farmer named Henry Wicker had a problem. His cattle refused to drink from one of the springs on his property. The water was bitter, strange tasting. He tried it himself and confirmed it. Something was dissolved in that spring that did not belong. But then something unexpected happened. The locals started noticing that the bitter water had healing properties. Wounds recovered faster, muscles relaxed, swelling went down. Within decades, the small English town sitting on top of those springs became one of the most famous destinations in all of Europe. People traveled hundreds of miles just to bathe in the water. The town was called Epsom, and the bitter compound dissolved in those springs became known as Epsom salt. For nearly 300 years after that discovery, Epsom salt was used exclusively as a medicine. Bath soaks, laxatives, muscle treatments, nobody connected it to agriculture. Nobody thought to pour it on a plant. That changed in the early 1900s when farmers in southern England started noticing something strange. The same compound their grandmothers dissolved in bath water could resurrect dying crops. Pale, struggling plants were turning green again. Yields were climbing. And the explanation, when scientists finally worked it out, turned out to be one of the most elegant pieces of plant biology ever discovered. Here is the part that blew my mind when I first learned it. Every single green thing you have ever seen in your life, every leaf, every blade of grass, every vegetable hanging off a vine in your garden, is green for exactly one reason. A single magnesium atom sits at the geometric center of every chlorophyll molecule on Earth. Think about that. One atom. And without it, the green disappears entirely. Here is what makes that even more remarkable. The shape of a chlorophyll molecule under a microscope looks almost identical to the shape of hemoglobin, the molecule that carries oxygen in your blood. The difference between the two is this. Your blood has an iron atom at the center. Plant chlorophyll has a magnesium atom. You run on iron. Your plants run on magnesium. And when the magnesium runs out, the exact same thing happens to your plants that happens to a human with iron deficiency. The color drains away, the energy disappears, growth slows down and eventually stops. The plant starts cannibalizing itself, breaking down its own older leaves to pull magnesium out and send it to newer growth. And here is the part that should genuinely concern every farmer watching this. Magnesium is the most overlooked nutrient deficiency in American home gardens. Not nitrogen, not potassium, magnesium. And most farmers never even know their plants are starving for it because the symptoms look just like a dozen other problems. So they buy more fertilizer, they adjust their watering, they test for pests, and the real problem just keeps getting worse underneath it all. Let me tell you exactly how to spot it, because once you see this pattern, you cannot unsee it. When a plant starts running low on magnesium, the first sign shows up on the older, lower leaves. The tissue between the leaf veins starts turning yellow, but the veins themselves, the lines and branches running through the leaf, stay dark green. Yellow between the veins, green veins. That specific pattern has a name. It is called interveinal chlorosis, and it is your plant waving a white flag at you. The reason it shows up on the older leaves first is exactly what I described earlier. The plant is pulling magnesium out of its old tissue and sending it up to the new growth. It is sacrificing the bottom to keep the top alive. Which means by the time you notice the yellowing on the lower leaves, the deficiency has already been going on for a while. Now ask yourself, have you ever seen that pattern in your garden? Yellow striping between green veins, usually starting at the bottom of the plant. If you grow tomatoes, peppers, roses, or potatoes, the answer is almost certainly yes. And you probably thought it was overwatering, underwatering, a pH problem, or just a weak plant. It was magnesium deficiency. And the fix was sitting in your bathroom cabinet the entire time. Now let me tell you why this deficiency is so widespread in American gardens. Because the answer connects to something you would never expect. There are 3 situations where magnesium almost always runs out faster than plants can use it. Sandy or fast-draining soils. When water moves through soil quickly, it carries minerals with it. Magnesium is highly water-soluble, which means every heavy rain or heavy watering session is slowly leaching it out of your growing beds. Over a single season, sandy soil can lose enough magnesium to visibly impact plant performance. Acidic soils below a pH of 6. At low pH levels, magnesium becomes chemically bound to soil particles in a form plants cannot access. The magnesium is there, the plants just cannot get to it. And without a soil test, you would never know the difference. Container gardens and raised beds. This one catches a lot of farmers off guard. When you grow in containers, you are working with a fixed volume of soil. Every time you water, you flush some magnesium out the drainage holes. Over a full growing season, that adds up to a significant loss. Most potting mixes do not include enough magnesium to make up for it. Here is the 4th situation that applies to almost everyone watching this. If you have been working the same garden beds for more than 2 years without regular compost additions, your magnesium is likely depleted. Crops pull it out of the soil with every harvest. If you are not putting it back, the reserves drop quietly over time until the plants start showing the stress. All right, now let me tell you about the second ingredient in Epsom salt, because most tutorials only talk about the magnesium. The sulfur gets ignored almost entirely, and that is a mistake. Epsom salt is magnesium sulfate, magnesium and sulfur together. And the sulfur is pulling its own weight in ways that are easy to overlook. Sulfur is essential to how plants build proteins, amino acids, enzymes, hormones, structural compounds. All of those require sulfur in the synthesis process. If you have ever grown onions, garlic, broccoli, or cabbage, the distinctive sharp flavor those crops produce comes directly from sulfur compounds in the plant tissue. But here is the surprising part. Sulfur levels in American soils have been quietly declining for decades, not because of over-farming, because of clean air regulations. The same industrial air quality improvements that reduced acid rain and made the air healthier to breathe also eliminated a major source of atmospheric sulfur deposition. For generations, industrial emissions were accidentally fertilizing fields with sulfur as they fell out of the air. When those emissions were cleaned up, The accidental sulfur fertilization stopped too. Farmers growing in areas that once had that atmospheric sulfur input started seeing deficiencies they had never seen before. And synthetic fertilizers almost never address it. Because sulfur is not one of the three numbers on the fertilizer bag: nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. Those are the big three. Everything else gets treated like a footnote. Epsom salt corrects both deficiencies in a single application: magnesium and sulfur, for $3 a box. Faster than any synthetic amendment on any garden center shelf. Now I want to be straight with you because I am not here to oversell anything. Epsom salt is not magic. It does not fix every plant problem. It does not boost growth on plants that are already getting enough magnesium. If your soil is already balanced, applying Epsom salt will produce almost no visible change. And over time, excess magnesium can actually interfere with calcium uptake in the soil. That is a real issue, and it is worth understanding. Calcium deficiency in tomatoes shows up as blossom end rot, that dark, sunken rot on the bottom of the fruit that ruins tomatoes and peppers in late summer. Some gardeners see struggling plants, apply Epsom salt because a YouTube video told them it fixes everything, and they actually make the blossom end rot worse by blocking the calcium the plant needs. That is the wrong use of this tool, and I am not going to pretend otherwise. The right use is specific. It is targeted. It is for plants that are genuinely magnesium deficient. And when those conditions exist, the transformation is real, and it is fast, and it is measurable. If you want to know for certain before you apply anything, a soil test from your local extension office costs $10 to $15 and gives you exact numbers. That is always the best starting point for any soil amendment decision. But if you are seeing interveinal chlorosis on your lower leaves, if you are growing in sandy or acidic soil, if you are working in containers or raised beds that have been planted through multiple seasons without amendment, the odds are very high that magnesium is part of your problem. All right, here is the recipe. Pay close attention to the details because the dilution rate and the application method determine whether this actually works or just runs off into the ground. You need 1 tablespoon of plain Epsom salt per gallon of water. Plain. That part matters. Epsom salt sold for bath use sometimes comes with added fragrances, essential oils, and skin softeners. Those additives are fine for a bath. They are not fine for plants. Some of them can damage leaf tissue on contact, so check the label before you buy. You want plain magnesium sulfate, nothing added. Any grocery store, any pharmacy aisle, usually $3 to $4 per box. 1 box makes 30 to 40 gallons of finished solution. Now you have 2 ways to apply this, and the method you choose changes how fast you see results. The first method is a foliar spray. You mix the solution and spray it directly onto the leaves. Magnesium absorbs through the leaf surface within hours. Visible color change can begin within 48 hours of application. This is your fast response option when you are looking at yellow leaves and you want results this week. For the foliar spray, add 1 teaspoon of plain liquid dish soap per gallon to the mixture. The soap acts as a surfactant. It breaks the surface tension of the water so the droplets spread across the leaf instead of beating up and rolling off. Without the soap, a lot of your solution hits the plant and falls straight to the ground without making leaf contact. The second method is a soil drench. You pour the solution at the base of the plant and let the root system absorb it over 3 to 7 days. This method works more slowly, but it produces longer-lasting results. It rebuilds magnesium reserves in the soil for the current season and beyond. A soil drench keeps working after the foliar spray has already done its fast correction. The smartest approach uses both. Spray the leaves for fast color correction this week. Drench the soil for sustained improvement across the whole season. Here is how you mix it. Start with a 1-gallon container. Add the tablespoon of Epsom salt. Pour in a small amount of warm water first, not cold. Epsom salt dissolves faster in warm water, and you want full dissolution before you fill the rest of the container. Stir until the crystals are completely dissolved. Then fill to 1 gallon with cool water. If you are making a foliar spray, add 1 teaspoon of plain dish soap and stir gently. Do not shake it hard or you will end up with a container full of foam. Pour the finished solution into a clean pump sprayer for foliar use, or directly into a watering can for soil drench. Use the solution immediately. Do not store mixed Epsom salt solution for more than a day. The magnesium can start to precipitate out of solution as it sits, and you lose effectiveness. Timing matters for foliar spray. Apply in the early morning just after sunrise or in the evening after the heat of the day has passed. If you spray onto wet leaves in direct midday sun with dish soap in the mix, you risk leaf scorch on sensitive plants. Morning and evening applications avoid that entirely. Apply every 2 to 4 weeks during the active growing season. The peak demand windows are during flowering and during fruit development. Those are the phases when magnesium consumption inside the plant is at its highest. That is when an application does the most visible work. 1 gallon of finished solution covers roughly 12 to 20 mature plants, depending on their size. Now let me walk through the plants that respond most dramatically, because results are not equal across every species. The most visible transformations happen on the plants with the highest magnesium demand and the most susceptibility to deficiency. Tomatoes and peppers. These are the poster children for magnesium deficiency in the American garden. Both are heavy feeders with high magnesium demand, and both show interveinal chlorosis faster and more severely than almost any other common garden crop. Apply the foliar spray on yellowing tomato or pepper plants, and you will often see a visible color shift in 4 to 5 days. Flower production increases. Fruit set improves. Yield goes up measurably on plants that were quietly starving. Roses. Roses respond with stronger stem development and brighter, more saturated bloom color. If your roses have ever seemed dull or washed out compared to what you see at the nursery, magnesium deficiency is one of the most common causes. Potatoes. Potatoes are one of the highest magnesium-demanding crops in the garden. Heavy leaf canopy, larger tuber development, and significantly better storage quality all follow from correcting magnesium deficiency in potato beds. Cucumbers, squash, and melons. These vine crops respond with larger fruit and more consistent set. The sulfur component in Epsom salt also contributes to the flavor profile of cucurbits in ways that are subtle but real. Container and houseplants. Peace lilies, philodendrons, ficus, and similar houseplants grown in pots that have been watered regularly without any nutrient replenishment are almost always magnesium deficient by mid-season. Apply the solution as a soil drench and you will typically see response within 10 days, even in interior conditions with lower light. I want to give you one advanced combination before we wrap up, because this is where the technique goes to the next level. Add 1 tablespoon of blackstrap molasses to your gallon of Epsom salt solution. Blackstrap molasses, available in any grocery store, a few dollars a bottle. Here is what it does. Molasses is rich in carbon compounds that feed the microbial communities living in your soil. Healthy soil microbes increase the bioavailability of nutrients, which means the magnesium from your Epsom salt gets converted into plant-available form faster and more efficiently when the microbial population is active and well-fed. Magnesium through the leaves directly. Magnesium through the roots made more accessible by the microbial activity the molasses supports. Both at the same time. Organic growers have been using this two-ingredient combination for decades. It represents the highest performance version of this technique and costs maybe $1 more per batch than the basic recipe. Apply it the same way, every 2 to 4 weeks. Foliar spray or soil drench or both. Here is where I am going to leave you. The global synthetic fertilizer industry generates over $200 billion a year. Billions of dollars in research, marketing, and retail shelf space, all focused on convincing you to buy plastic bags of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. Those nutrients matter. I am not disputing that. But the industry built around them has quietly allowed the most common deficiency in American backyard gardens to go uncorrected for generations. Not because the solution is complicated, not because it is expensive, because the solution costs $3, fits in a box smaller than your fist, and has been sitting in the pharmacy aisle next to the bandages and the antacids since before your grandparents were born. Epsom salt is not a miracle. It is not going to fix a calcium problem or a nitrogen problem or a pest infestation. But in the specific conditions where magnesium deficiency exists, and those conditions are more common in American gardens than almost any other nutrient problem, the transformation it produces is real, visible, fast, and durable. The next time you are in the grocery store, do not walk past that box in the pharmacy aisle without stopping. $3, 1 tablespoon per gallon. Foliar spray in the morning, soil drench at the base. Check your lower leaves before you apply anything. If you see yellow striping between green veins, you just identified the problem, and now you know exactly what to do about it. If this video gave you something real to work with this season, hit that like button right now. It takes 1 second and it helps more farmers find this content. Subscribe so you do not miss what is coming next. And drop your biggest garden challenge in the comments below. Tomatoes not setting fruit, yellowing leaves you cannot explain, yield that seems lower than it should be. Whatever your hardest problem is this season, I want to know, because that is exactly what this channel is built around. The harvest is waiting. Now you know what it needs.